It's foggy. We're down in Galveston waiting to hopefully go up the Houston Ship Channel today. If we don't get orders, because we can only stay here for a limited time, we get kicked out of the anchorage and we'll have to roll around outside for 24 hours and then reapply to come back in. But hopefully we'll get orders, but it is pretty foggy out. You can hear the ships blowing their horns going up and down. Who knows? But anyway, just wanted to show you that. So while we're waiting here in the fog, I thought I'd take a minute to answer something one of you guys have asked. I think it was Rusty Gunner in the comments had said that last week's video he wasn't really sure what I was talking about when I was talking about the safety pickup line. So basically, here's a picture of a barge, a fuel barge here, and generally what we have is the bridle, and that will be made up of really heavy wire that will come, and it's usually heavier than our actual tow wire because it's a great big heavy thing. It comes down here like this. This comes over here like this, and then there's something called a fish plate, which is basically like a big triangle, and then this goes over to a pennant, and then we have a socket right here with a thimble on it, and then we shackle into that and tow it along. And all this weight adds to the shock absorber aspect of trying to put more weight in the water, so that the lifting of all that weight up and down the water column, or in this case even out of the water, acts as a shock absorber, so there isn't a big strain on the load. But if any of that stuff breaks, it won't break in a beautiful flat calm day. It'll break on like the worst day ever, and that would be a really bad thing. So when we tow the barge without any people on it, if there's somebody on there, we can shoot a line over to them. We have line throwing rockets. They're called line throwing devices that have rockets in them, and we'll shoot a line very, very far. And it's a very small line, then you pull a bigger line, and then a bigger line, and that sort of stuff. But anyway, when you tow a barge that's unmanned, and you have the tankerman aboard the tug like we do, or like we just did, you have to have a secondary, another way of doing this. So what they do is they actually have a towing eye over here, and they have an emergency pennant that is wrapped on the outside of everything that runs down the barge. Remember, this is the bow and this is the stern, and it runs down the barge right along, right at the deck where the handrails come up, and it's tied on. Some of them use actual like metal bands, and other ones will use special line, but it's tied on all the way down here, and then over here it'll go over and it'll have another socket, a thimble to shackle into, and then all over here, like I say, it'll be tied with all these lightweight things, whether they're metal or line. And then, just bear with me here for a second. Then what happens is, before the tankerman leaves, he'll deploy this floating yellow line, and this will go like this. It'll be wrapped up like this, be tied onto the rail, and outside of the rail, all of this is outside of the rail, and then this line will float off for quite a ways and then go to a buoy at the end. So in the case that our tow line broke over here and now we've got a barge that's just floating there, what do? Well, the tug, and obviously it's going to be really nasty weather if all that's happened, so we can't get alongside the barge because we'll crash into it, because if it's rough enough to break the tow line or the shackle or the fish plate or the bridle or anything like that, we don't want to get physically close to the barge because it will be really bad. So what we do is we bring the tug over here, and where this line is floating on the water, it's a big yellow thing like that, and we usually have a red ball on the end, we call it a poly ball. And unfortunately, I think that one seemed to have, we've lost that one. Like I don't know what happened to it, if it got stuck on something or somebody hit it or whatever. But anyway, so they put a yellow one on in the video from last week. But even if there is just the line, this is all poly line, so it'll float up, it's yellow and it floats at the top of the water column. So if we come over here with a tug, remember this is like 365 feet here, so if we come over here with a 100-foot tug, there's plenty of line here that we could snap that and start pulling it in. And as we do this, it goes from a little line to a bigger line like that. We pull it, and then that bunch of coil that's over here, you pull it and you break the line, and then all that line would come out, and then eventually you'd have, you're talking about a line that's a good inch in diameter, very strong, and you'd wrap it up to the tug. And remember, the tug and the barge would be all, this is probably really bad weather, and you would start pulling on that line, and what it will do is it will pull the socket off, and then one by one each one of these will fail. It'll go pop, 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 and it'll break. And because all that emergency pickup hawser is on the outside of everything, it will just fall into the water, and then by the time you get done, you'll bring your tug over here, winch that line up on deck, pull that hawser, that thimble up on deck, which is effectively, it's not really a bridle, it's because at this point you're not looking for the most efficient means of towing, you're looking to keep from going aground or anything like that. So then you'd shackle in on your other winch, and you pull that, and you'd start putting out new wire or whatever, and you'd get underway into safer water until you could get into a place that's safer or the weather lets up. So anyway, hopefully that makes that kind of clears up how that works. So when that's like that, by the time you get done, this no longer will be there. All those attachment points will have broken off. And remember, the wire is like this big around. It's huge. And so you can have a metal band, a strap, or you can tie with a 3/8 line or something like that. And when you pull on that 1-inch line to pull the socket over, it's going to just go bang, 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 bang. And these won't accumulate all together. It'll be the force on one, and then the force on the next, and the next, and the next, until you're out front. That's how we do that. So I just want to take a moment and thank any of you that have been watching me. There's a bunch of you guys that have been on and commenting, liking, and subscribing and all that since day one, and I really appreciate it. And of course, always thank you to the patrons that keep the channel going. But I want to welcome some of you new people that are here. There's a bunch of new people, so I figured this might be a good opportunity to reinforce some of the things that we've been talking about along the way, but also maybe help some of the new people to understand how these things work. So to try to answer some of the questions that I get all the time, one of the things is everyone wants to debate this whole new thing about a new format or not. I gotta tell you, it's really not up for debate, and it's really, I don't have a whole lot of say in this. I have a choice. I am making content at the pleasure of my employer. If he doesn't want, if this is his company and his equipment, and I'm very fortunate to be able to film it, and quite frankly, I think you guys are very fortunate to be able to have an eye in this industry. It's something that you don't get a lot of opportunities for. Now, unfortunately, when different, I don't want to say laws, I want to say, customs or ways of doing, best practices in the industry, as those evolve, the channel has to evolve too. And some of the things that we had done before, personally, I liked them better. I know many of you liked them better too, but the alternative is to have no content at all. So there's kind of that, so that's why we do what we do. To answer another question, people will, some of the newer people will ask if we can see the loading or discharging of the product in the barge, and that's there's a bunch of reasons why we don't really want to show that. Just to name off a couple, there's a security issue. There's also a issue of proprietary equipment and means, and then the easiest one to understand is something called the lack of intrinsically safe equipment. And what I mean by that is, although a GoPro is waterproof and you can take it underwater and all that sort of stuff, it's never gone through the hundreds of thousands of dollars to get tested to be what they call intrinsically safe, in other words, explosion proof. So because of that, I can't take a GoPro or any other camera that I have that doesn't have the certification of being intrinsically safe. I can't take that on the barge to film. So that's the easiest reason why you don't see us on the barge, loading product, discharging product, and that sort of stuff. But there's that. Another question we get all the time is, why don't I tow all the time, or why don't we push all the time? Why do we push in push gear in the notch, or why do we push heads and tails made up alongside? And so everything in life, there are pros and cons to everything. When you're in push gear, you have a lot more control of the barge. Mainly that you can stop the barge than the boat. When you're made up in push gear, assuming that it's not really rough out, the barge is just an extension of the boat at that point. So you can back on it to stop it. Unlike a car, you don't have brakes. When an object in motion is going to stay at motion. Well, when you're pushing a barge and you pull off the throttles, it's going to just keep going. So the only way we can stop things is by pulling, going astern and pulling the way off of the barge. They maneuver a lot better, and so that's something that's great. We really like that. So why wouldn't we do that? Oh, and then the other thing too is that having one brake in the water, pushing one vessel through the water, is more efficient than two vessels going through the water. In other words, if you were towing one, you'd have the tug out in front, the barge behind it, and the wash from the propeller and the two different things, they call it wetted surface, all of that adds up. So you're actually more efficient pushing the barge as one unit, because the barge takes the blunt of breaking the water, and then it slowly goes up and continues past the stern of the tug. It doesn't have to do that again. So that all of those are good things. But the reason why we don't do it all the time is because we are restricted from in how much weather we can take. And if you think about it, our barge holds a little over 2 million gallons of product, and with the barge on top, I think you're talking 8 or 10,000 tons altogether. So maybe even more. Actually, I think 8 or 10,000 tons of product, and then there's the barge, which I think weighs like 2,000 tons. Anyway, so there's the barge. Being a big mass is going to stay relatively static. It's not. It's rolling, but in a rough sea, the barge basically, in relationship to the tug, it's static, where the tug is moving back and forth. Now, when you're in the notch, and by the way, the deeper the notch, the more you can push through rough seas. But if you the push gear can't take too much. So in other words, we can you can only make that Dyneema line that's on the edge is stronger than wire, and it's really strong, but it's not going to take the weight of the tug. Where if a big sea comes, a big swell comes over, it'll lift up the tug like that. The lines will go slack, and then it comes down. And not only do you have the weight of the tug, but you have the momentum as well, and that will rip everything off. And so basically, we're in a broad sense, everything depends on whether you're going into it or you're going away from it, of the seas. But basically, we can do around 2 feet, maybe 3 feet of waves. After that, we can't push it anymore, because we'll just break everything up. Now, another problem that we have is that when it's really windy and the barge is light, it's very hard when we have 360, almost 400 feet of barge ahead of us that might be 30 feet tall. That's a lot of sail area. So if we're back there at the furthest point of the pivot point, it doesn't take much wind to blow that bow around, and we can't hold on to it. In cases like that, we'll go heads and tails on it, and we'll actually shorten the distance of the lever. You know what I mean? Instead of having a 400-foot barge, if you move up 100 feet on it, now you have 100 feet in back of you and 300 feet in front of you instead of being 450 feet overall. That works out better as well. And there's also, when you're towing a barge, one of the ways you stop towing it is that you flop on it and you end up heads and tails, so that's another thing. But when it's rough and we need to go somewhere, we tow. And towing is great because the weight of the wire produces something called catenary, which is a fancy nautical term for a bend in the wire. That's producing catenary. The wire that we put out is not, some people will write in the comments, why is the barge so far away, or why is the barge so close? All of that has to do with changing conditions. It's not static at all. It's constantly in flux. In other words, the conditions are. So if it's really rough, if you look, everything looks fine from one's perspective, but if you break it out, what's happening is that the tug will actually slow down as it goes up a wave, and then it starts speeding up as it comes down a wave. And this might be something that you and I can't really see, but that's happening. Now the same thing is happening with the barge. It goes up, slows down, and speeds up coming down. Now those differences will cause them to be out of step. So in other words, if the barge is hitting a wave and the tug is surfing down the other wave, the two of them will separate. If the opposite happens, the two of them will come together. Now, I've said this before, but the example I like is Captain Irving Johnson's example of if you had a nail and a hammer and you put the hammer up against the nail, you'd never be able to drive it in. But by swinging it, you're charging the energy with, you're charging the hammer with that kinetic energy, and you're able to drive the nail into the hammer. Well, the same thing happens with the difference between the tow, the tug and the barge. And when those two, when that wire comes tight, it'll break the wire, or rip the winch off, or break the ground tackle, the tackle on the other side. It's bad, so we don't want to do that. So there's a couple things we can do. We can slow down, but we can also add wire, and adding wire puts weight out. So when you put a whole bunch of wire out there, you can put a couple tons of wire, literally tons of wire, and of course the bridle and the fish plate and all that sort of stuff is heavy too. And all that weight produces catenary, and as the two go up, the wire will come up in the water column, and it provides more tension. And so then when it goes down, instead of the barge and tug going back and forth, the wire moves up and down depending on the load of the tension, and it softens that out and makes it much more manageable. So that's great. Why don't we tow all the time? Well, the problem is that we can't stop the barge. We can try to turn it, and when we turn it, we go like this, and we're just coaxing it over as we turn, and we hope that it comes along with us, and that's great. But if something happens, we need to stop it. We don't have a whole lot of force. The only way we can stop it is by rounding up on it. And if we have 5 layers out there, it might take over a half an hour for us just to get short on it, and then we've got to get the barge slowed down. That might take another half hour. It takes a long time to get that so the idea of just being able to stop a barge on a wire, it's not going to happen. And so incidentally, another question we get all the time is, do people ever go between the tug and the tow, the tug and the barge? And I have to be careful how I answer this because I don't want to end up in court someday. But I can tell you, the answer that I've been telling people is, it happens more than you would think, and it happens much more than it ever should. It should never happen. Anybody that's on the water that's familiar with day shapes and lights should know this. And also, if you can't see between the barge and the tug, you really should have radar or something so you're not just blindly going somewhere. And you know what? Of all the stories I've heard of people passing between the barge and the tug, it's never been a visibility issue. It's never been thick of fog. It's always been like early in the morning or something like that, and somebody's on autopilot and they're not paying attention and they go over. And that's a really bad thing when that happens. Obviously, you can cut somebody in half, the boat, or if the line comes up, because a cantilever, we don't have a whole lot of control over that cantilever. If that lifts up, it could rip out the running gear of the boat, and then that would make the boat sink very quickly. Not to mention the odds of horrible things happening to the boat or the people on board. Of course, that would be awful as well. But the way we deal with that is that if somebody is going, obviously we're putting if it's at night, we put the light in their window. We're blasting 5. If you hear 5 or more short blasts, that's the emergency signal. So everybody should stop and look around and say, somebody thinks there's an emergency going on. What am I doing wrong? Be blowing the horn, doing all this sort of stuff, and obviously calling on the radio, but usually somebody that's not looking out the window is probably not listening to the radio either. But anyway, when all else fails, we pull the throttles back. And by doing that, the tug slows down and the barge keeps moving, so the catenary increases and the boat goes by. And this didn't happen to me, but it did happen to a friend of mine, and they were doing a barge in Buzzards Bay, and a boat went through like this, a great big like 55 Viking, I think, probably a multi-million-dollar sport fishing boat, and they were calling and they were shining the lights in the window, and the guy went, and so the captain ended up pulling the throttles back, the boat went by, and then when the captain came back into the wire had gone down, snagged a rock, and the boat lost a $30,000 wire, and he probably lost his bonus and everything else and all that. And there's somebody out there that was running that boat that doesn't know that captain saved his life and definitely saved the boat as well and all that sort of stuff. And it was at a great expense to his company, and probably his company wasn't really happy with him. I'm sure that they were happy that he saved the life, but nobody wants to replace a wire when you don't need to. Yeah, so that does happen. But anyway, we need to, the reason why we can't tow all the time is because we have a lot less control of the barge when that's happening. Meaning we can't stop it. So that's why we do that. I think that's probably enough. If you like these, let me know. Write in the comments what you would like me to do a video on to answer your questions, all right? This has been kind of fun for me, so hopefully it makes sense to you. Take care. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And if you get a chance, please help me out. I really need help. So many of you watch all the time and are not subscribed, and it doesn't cost you anything. Look, it's wonderful if you want to be a part of our Patreon crew. Our Patreon people are awesome. For $2 a month or more, they get this content, they support it and all that. That's wonderful. They get ad-free videos and private videos and all that sort of stuff. But if you don't want to do any of that, just subscribe. I have a reason, and I'll tell you later, but I really need to get my numbers up just a little bit more. The clock is ticking. More about that later. And please check out my other channel, SV Paquita. I've been in, now look, you say I'm not into sailboats. I'm a tugboat guy who happens to have a sailboat, and I'm doing new things over there. Right now we're down in the Bahamas, and I have a whole bunch of content that not only is I put out, but I have a whole bunch that are in the queue that will come out every week over there. And I'm going back there for another 3 weeks, so I'm all excited, and that's kind of cool. And we have a big trip coming up to the Azores and then over to the Mediterranean. So maybe you might, even if it's not your thing, do your old buddy Tim a solid. If you don't want to spend any money, hit subscribe to both channels. You really hook me up. Thank you guys so much. Take care. Be safe. And as always, I'll see you on the one.